So, as we've talked about, this is all about awakening leadership through nature. And this cover slide is the cover slide for Grail leadership. And so it's nature is very much a part of Grail leadership. And really it's at its fundamental heart. So I'm super excited to be sharing my experiences and thoughts and insights around nature. And I'm super looking forward to everyone else's as well. So for me, nature is something that allows me to connect with what's real. And what I mean by that is there is so much noise out in the, the airwaves these days. We're being bombarded by not only talking voices, but media and information and energies and so much kind of chaos in a maelstrom kind of environment right now. And nature for me has always been this place that when whatever is happening in a dramatic kind of way around me, I can just escape into nature and just find myself again, return to myself again. So nature allows me to remember, the stillness that is so a part of this universe and that's so readily available to all of us. It allows me to remember my essence and the essence of everything. It allows me to come back to being and not always doing, and just brings in that sort of the lightness of being and the vitality and so much that it teaches me around rhythms and patterns and cycles and the natural order of birth, life, death, rebirth, all of that, and allows me to have a feeling of coming home. So nature has always been a huge solace for me, and ever more so as I've been on this sort of awakening leadership journey. One of the things that I've been really excited about for the last several years and had a deep passion for is organic food and regenerative farming. And so Tim, you were speaking my language when you were introducing your background. I was like, oh, this is great, because food and farming is at the root, and the soil underneath really our planet. And we've been so disconnected from that. So when I look at nature and I look at things like regenerative farming, or just even a forest that is uncultivated out there in nature, you can see the web of life that truly exists. Everything is interconnected and everything has an essential role to play if you tune in long enough and listen deeply enough to what its role is. It always has a part to play or it wouldn't be here. So nature is something that I continue to observe and admire and be in awe of and learn from, in that interconnectivity of all things. So when you look at food forests, for example, you start to understand the things that we call fungus, and there are fungicides to kill the fungus layers. The mycelial network of the mushrooms and the fungus underneath the soil is incredibly crucial to growing our food, to healing our soil, the waters on the planet, really the way that our biosphere actually operates. There's a huge information network that happens in the mycelial realm. The bugs, the pollinators, the leaves that fall off the trees and then decay and then feed the worms that then release other chemicals and minerals into the soil that make it that rich, fertile soil. So everything is in continual interconnectivity. And as I've started to realize that more and more, I've seen how that applies not just in nature as if it's out there, it's in everything, because as Kelly says, we are nature. So I just want to give a quick little plug for this. Is one of my absolute favorite movies called The Biggest Little Farm, that really brings that concept home in a really heartwarming and endearing way. And it talks about this couple that set out, had never been farmers before, but they set out to start this farm and started realizing how every single thing was connected to something else, and started learning how to work with that and with the cycles of it, and bringing in the chickens and the pigs and the goats that would help condition the soil, and then what the coyotes were doing in the picture, and all these sorts of things just really comes home in a beautiful way. And so then when you look at soil, and I use soil as such a metaphor for organizations, what's the fertile soil that this organism, and a lot of people call it organizations. I've been moving more to the word organism because it's a living organism. Any business, any community organization, any family unit, any co-creative organization is a living organism. So what is the soil that's at that? Is it alive, and is it vibrant, and is it filled with this humus layer that is built with the decay that turns into something that births something else? Does it have all these minerals and biodiversity and the whole cycle of life happening within the soil that then leads to this regenerative life force energy that's being released, that then taps into the microbiome in the soil, that then feeds the microbiome in our guts, and really provides optimal health? Or is it just dirt, where it's just, when we all know the difference between that soil that you just want to run between your toes and fingers and smell, and dirt that you just want to take a shower and get it off of you because it's stripped of that life force energy. There's none of that biodiversity and the cycle of life and the vibrancy and the vitality of life force energy that exists within it. So I'm constantly thinking of like, okay, is this company or is this vision or idea founded on something that feels more like dirt and concrete, or does it feel more like fertile, regenerative soil? And then when I look at this world of farming, one of the largest movements right now is in this regenerative farming. There's a new regenerative organic certification that's happening. That's amazing to watch that movement happening. But what's happening is the world is realizing that the agrarian civilization that we came from was really a healthy way of living in so many respects. And we've modernized it and mechanized it, but we've gone so far that we've completely broken our connection with where our food comes from and with these cycles of life and how soil is actually nourished in a way that nourishes the food that we eat. So on the left side is this vision of extractive practices where there's a lot of monocropping. So massive acres of land is just growing one single crop, that then when you're just growing that one crop over and over, it's not actually feeding the soil. So then over time, it just starts to be depleted of real vitality and nutrition. And it feels like a competitive, extractive interplay where it's sort of man as apex predator controlling over nature and taking its will over nature and killing things that it doesn't like or want to see, weeds, fungus, all those sorts of things, herbicides, fungicide, pesticides are all being blasted from a chemical mechanized kind of way. And then we've mechanized machinery that harvests these things. And it completely is devoid of actual life and the heart and soul of what food actually is meant to be. And the regeneratives working with nature, and how do we co-create with all the beings that are in this huge ecosystem and this huge cycle of life? So livestock rotation, where you actually have rotational grazing, where the cows will come in and goats will eat down the alfalfa and that sort of thing. And then you can move them along to the next area, because by doing that, their hooves are breaking up the soil, their droppings and manure are fertilizing the soil, they're keeping it from getting wholly overgrown. And then you bring in the chickens and the pigs and all that come in behind them, and they eat all the grubs out of the cow manure. And it's just amazing to watch when you start tuning into what the genius is in each of these players in the ecosystem and start deploying those to grow your food. So I've been watching that and saying, like, this is no different from any business, any organization, any initiative that we're bringing forward. Is it one that is in this competitive win-lose, power over, going to mechanize things, make them efficient, but is it removing the soul from that fertile soil? Or is it something that is regenerative, that is co-creative, based on mutual thriving, recognizing the role that every player plays, and that gives more life as opposed to extracting life? So those are constant inquiries that I have whenever I'm looking at whatever I'm wanting to build or whatever arena I may be wanting to engage with. And then I really, through all these observations, started having this insight about profitability, and really the Western culture of business is so focused on return on investment, profitability as a measure of success. And so what that actually is this extractive win-lose proposition, where the formula is, I am more successful when I can put the least amount of time, money, energy, resources into this venture and take the most amount out. Yay, I won, you know? And I thought, how did that become our definition of winning and success? When really, what if organizations and companies, you know, the Fortune 500 were more like the Prosperability 500, where it's like, what is the impact that your organization made to contribute to humanity and the earth in some way? And that is the measure of success. And so the baseline is you have rewarded your employees, stakeholders, trading partners. They all are receiving thriving levels of fair trade, fair wages, and beyond fair. Fair is kind of a baseline. It's up to the thriving level for me. And that once you've done that, what do you do with the surplus? How do you roll that back into something that then expands and contributes to someone else's organization or someone else's healing or the planet in coming back into balance and harmony? So what if that was our gauge for successful organizations? So I sort of coined this phrase of prosperability to replace the notion of profitability. And actually, I want to take a breath there and stop sharing my screen for a minute. Oh, it's hard when I'm in play mode, my cursor disappears. So there we go. And just come back to faces and take a breath. And yeah, just see how this is landing for a few minutes, because this notion of this shifting our focus from short-term profits that we're seeing is so damaging and harmful and extractive, because somebody and or the planet always loses in that formula. There's always a loser for somebody to win. So in this regenerative model, it's more like, how many wins can we eke out of the system? How can every single individual, organization, the earth, whatever part of the ecosystem is touching this organization, how can it feel like it's winning, and not winning at the cost of something else, but really receiving what they're wanting to receive in a way that really fills them up? How are we doing? All right, great. I'm going to head back into the slide land. We're about halfway through, or maybe even further along. Let's see. Okay. So the other things that I've started to glean from nature as a teacher, as I've just been witnessing and immersing myself in nature and watching the mystery and the magic of how things evolve and grow and become, I've formed this notion of what I'm calling original intention, or a fractal seed. And the best metaphor I've used for that is an acorn. When you see this acorn, it's just this tiny little thing, right? I mean, as seeds go, it's a big seed, but in relation to a massive, mighty oak tree, it's compact. And yet it contains everything that it will need to become an oak tree. All the information, all the coding, all the timing, all the ability to attract in the right resources that it needs, to plug into an ecosystem in a way that it can thrive and survive and replicate. That's all contained in that tiny little seed. And it's a fractal seed because it also contains the same pattern as every other oak tree. Every oak tree has this particular shaped leaf, so that you're able to say, oh, this is an oak tree. And yet every oak tree is unique. Some have, you know, a big, huge, tall trunk with branches coming off on the top. And some are these wide, rambling, amazing beings that have thousands of branches coming off of them. But every one of those, what it will become is contained in that original intention, that original seed of what it's going to unfurl into. And one of the things that I noticed is that is the same as me. You know, when I look back on my journey, I have this belief that I've seeded this entire incarnation. In fact, every incarnation and iteration of me that has come into form has been seeded through some form of original intention. And that seed is in me, and it's in every human, of what is it? I'm going to become a human. I'm going to become a female human, but what flavor of female human am I going to become? And I've laid down this blueprint, this template for me. And that's there at the beginning, which means I can relax. I don't have to constantly be saying, what do I have to do to become better, to get more, to learn more, to achieve something? And do I need to worry about missing the boat or doing something wrong and going off track? I mean, it's like this original intention has all of this information of timing that it knows, not calendar timing, like now you're 55, it's time to do this. It's like, no, now you've walked through this threshold and the environment around you is ready for this next phase and you're ready for this next phase. So we're going to unfold the next a little bit. So that original intention always brings me back to peace. When I look at, I have everything that I need and I have the ability to attract in everything I need because I've designed it in, and so have all of us. And so they work together in this symbiotic way. Another aspect that I've seen is essential genius, meaning that every single aspect in these ecosystems have a unique role to play, and they play it amazingly. So there's this thing that I've learned as I've been delving into regenerative farming called Three Sisters, where the Native Americans would plant corn, beans, and squash together, because what they learned is that the corn provided this tall, strong stalk that the beans needed for support, so that they didn't just grow up and fall over. They could wrap themselves and lean against the corn. And then the squash was there providing ground cover and mulch and things like that. It's a low growing vegetable. And the beans, what they were contributing to this little mini ecosystem is nitrogen that the corn and the squash need to thrive. So these three sisters, when grown together, thrive in this little mini ecosystem, each doing what they're designed to do, providing their genius, providing their nitrogen or their strong stalks, or the ground cover, whatever that is needed for this little thing. They're showing up in their essential genius. The beans don't need to be a corn. The squash don't need to be beans. They're like, I'm squash and I'm so happy to be playing with you, and I'm playing my role and I'm receiving from you and I'm giving to you. So that is also a huge fundamental of this regenerative business notion that I've been playing with. And then the flow of nature. Just nature continually shows me how it's always wanting to be in flow, that it's abundant without measure. There's just an everlasting, the cup is continually overflowing with abundance. It's co-creative, it's evolutionary, it's networked. It isn't like these straight pyramid kind of things that the business world has led us to believe that we should be operating in. It's got tentacles and interconnections like a neural network. It's diverse, it's regenerative, co-creative, all of these aspects that nature shows me of how it is in flow. And so if things are not working out, and I feel like I'm pushing a boulder up the hill, that's my time to take a time out and just tune in and listen and stop, because something's not flowing. And it doesn't mean I'm forgetting something or doing something wrong or messing things up. It's like time to listen and see where the flow actually wants to happen and what might be damming the flow. So many organizations that are like, let's throw more resources at it, hire a bunch more people, put a lot of more investment into it. To me, I'm saying, let's do the inverse. Let's remove things out of the center so we can actually listen and see what wants to come through it, because nature flows in this beautiful toroidal field. And so that flow of nature is such an important piece to pay attention to as well. And then these nested ecosystems, everything is interconnected, and it's like these, some people call them nested holons. So there's spheres that are whole and complete, but they're always a part of something else. And so it's infinite in that you can always go from the most nano micro particle to the most cosmic multiverse that you can even imagine. It's always an ecosystem, a system within a system within a system. And so when you start to tune in to like, okay, what's the perspective that I'm bringing to this? Which ecosystem am I viewing this from? Am I viewing this as my role in my family? That'll drive a different decision. Then am I viewing this as my role in the ecosystem of Grail leadership? Am I viewing this in my role as a citizen of the Boulder community, of the visionary leaders community and the awakening leadership world, of the cosmos and a galactic traveler? I mean, what is the perspective? Where am I orienting, and in which ecosystem, and how is a choice that I'm making or a way that I'm operating impacting all of those ecosystems. Kelly talked about the ripple effect. The ecosystems are all connected. So you might be working at the nano level and impacting the cosmos. I mean, that butterfly effect that many of us have heard of, right? So I'm just fascinated by this, the order, the cosmic order that at some level makes things so simple. They're not this random, chaotic, just turn of events that, you know, there's an intelligence and an order that runs through it that feels like a master key that unlocks all the pieces. If I figure out this one thing, it applies on all these different levels. And so it allows me to relax. And whenever I start feeling, I have no idea why this is happening, this feels like chaos, I can come back to like, okay, I may not see why or how something is going to work out or why it's happening, but I can trust that it always is because I know that there's a bigger ecosystem at play. And then just looking at the patterns that show up in nature, the mathematical geometries and the music that plays through nature is unbelievably stunning and has so much to share about how we can align our organizations and our lives with nature. And so nowadays I see things far less in like pyramids and lines and checkerboard squares and much more in spheres and spirals and things like that, because that's nature and that's the feminine principle that has been lacking for so long in our leadership and in our organizations. They've been so imbalanced on that imbalanced masculine that they become so distorted. So connecting in with nature and tuning into nature and aligning and realizing I am that's why it resonates with me. And how is my organization aligned with that as opposed to trying to overcome it? Then things can just fall into place and that nature can flow so much better. Kelly, how am I doing on time? 3 minutes. Okay, I'll fly through. So when I was tuning into this, like how I know I've got this organization in me, I want to see how we can reinvent organizations, you know, read Frederick Laloux's book, Reinventing Organizations. I know there's a way we can align our organizations more with nature. And this one night I was just filled with these dreams and visions about, is it a vector equilibrium that creates the toroidal field or is it the flower of life? And I started researching it and found, oh, it's one and the same. The vector equilibrium, that's the framework, the geometric energetic framework that allows this toroidal regenerative life force energy to flow through it. When depicted from another view is the flower of life that you see through many, many ancient civilizations, ruins, Leonardo da Vinci's journals, the replication of cells in human life. And so I started saying like, all right, I really want to pattern after the flower of life. And then what emerged was the seed of life, which I've always been enamored with the Round Table and King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and the leadership by sitting shoulder to shoulder and not above anyone else, and each bringing their unique talents and gifts to the table in a way that it all works in unity. And so then what started emerging was I started seeing those pie wedges less as angular pie wedges and more as spheres. So Da Vinci's view of this flower of life, it's these holons within holons. So flower of life within a larger flower of life. And then that just showcased to me the seed of life that we've been using through the maps that we use to orient in Grail leadership. So this is just one example of when I was working with some folks here in Boulder about how do we create a regenerative ecosystem in the Boulder Front Range, looking at all these aspects of education, water, transportation, and then you zoom in on the food and farming sphere, but then that in itself would have like, okay, now the food and farming is at the center. So what are all the spheres that contribute to that around that aspect? And then looking at the constellation of roundtables, which I'm calling sovereign united networks. There's a whole thing in Grail leadership about sovereign unity that really comes from nature and the integration and alchemy of the masculine and feminine principles in nature and in everything within ourselves. So one quick second and then I'm done is something that came through with when I was looking at how do we optimize for genius. So in this configuration, the center sphere is your original intention. That's the shared vision that everyone is orienting to. And if a sphere is drawn in, they're bringing their genius to the round table. That means that their original intention is aligned with the original intention of that round table. And then they're contributing their unique genius to it. You've got the flow of nature through resonance. And then when you look at genius, you know, a pie baker, for instance, loves making pies. They don't love the business aspects of marketing and payroll and finance and taxes and all that. So, but there are people out there who do love that stuff. And so then how do we reallocate the work to say, like, okay, pie baker, you are an excellent pie baker. You just bake pies all day, and we'll take off of your plate the things that are not in your genius zone and give them to people for whom that is their genius, that they would love to be crunching numbers all day. And then through that, you start to form these roundtables of those operational aspects like finance, payroll, sales and marketing, technology. And they could create a roundtable that then serves other roundtables. So it starts to fractal out into this flower of life configuration that gets really, really amazing. So this lastly is the original intention of Grail Leadership. You'll get the slides. I don't need to go through it, but this is an example of how we landed on the original intention of Grail Leadership and how we communicate that to the world.